Mesaches Gittin Daf Yud Gimel. We begin with the Mishnah. A few lines into the Daf, the Mishnah compares a get shechor or isha to a regular star, as far as what happens if a person says to give one and then he dies. And the Gemara will discuss why the halacha should be true in the case of regular stars. So the Mishnah says as follows: somebody who says, "Give this get to my wife," or "this star shechor to my eved," and then he dies before he gives it to them. So they weren't zoche in it because they never received it. All he did was say give. So the halacha is that once he died, it can't be given anymore, and that's because he's no longer the woman's husband. She's already single from the time that he died, and he's no longer the eved's owner. He's already gone to the Yarshim, the inheritors. Now, if, however, he says to give a gift, he says give this 100 zuz, give this money to this person, and then he dies before he gets a chance to give anything, then they should give it even after the death. So the Gemara is going to want to discuss this last case. Why should that be? The money already belongs to the Yarshim from the moment that he dies. So the Gemara begins with Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, says the name of Rav, that this case has to be referring to where the money that he wants to be given is right in front of you. It's piled in a heap in the corner, he says. So the Gemara asks, what's the case? Are we talking about a healthy person or are we talking about a dying person? If we're talking about a healthy person, so you can't order something to be given and it doesn't transfer until you actually give it. You have to do a mashicha. You have to actually take the property. The fact that he says to give it shouldn't transfer. So why should you give it? It belongs to the inheritors from the moment that he dies. So it doesn't make sense to talking about a healthy person. Now, if you're talking about a person who's dying, then we have a rule that something that a dying person says to give, it's considered like it's given already. From the moment he says it, title is transferred to the person that he says. And the reason is because we were afraid that if he was concerned that we wouldn't listen to his instructions, he would be upset and that would hasten his illness. In order to prevent that, we say that anything you say is chal right away on the spot. If that's true, I understand the Mishnah then. From the moment he says to give it, it already belongs to the person who's supposed to receive it, and that's why we should actually go ahead and give it physically. However, what does it make a difference if it's piled in front of us or not? So that's the kasha that we have. So the Gemara is going to give it two answers and compare them. So the first answer comes from Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid says we're talking about a healthy person, and this is based on something that Rav Huna said in the name of Rav. Again, in the name of Rav. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav that there's a rule called Mamid Shlashta, and that's if you have three people, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven has given something to Shimon to watch. Shimon is guarding, he's protecting, he's holding something for Reuven. It belongs to Reuven, and Shimon's holding it on Reuven's behalf. Now, Reuven wants to give that to Levi, the third person. So if all three people are present, and he tells Shimon, give it to Levi, the moment he says it, it transfers ownership to Levi. And that's because Shimon's only holding it on behalf of Reuven. So for the moment that he says, give it, he's now holding it on behalf of Levi, even though no transfer actually happened. That's Rav Zvid's approach. Rav Papa has a different explanation. He says we're talking about a dying person, a shchiv meira, and this is based on another halacha that Rav said. Now, even though the possessions of the dying person from the moment he says to give, that should be enough, there's a caveat to that, and that Rav says that has to be that the money that he's saying to give is here, it's present, and he's saying give this. If he just says give a money without referring to which one, we can't just give any money because for all we know, he has hidden one away. He has a specific one he's referring to that he buried somewhere, and we can't give a different one. So therefore, the only way that the possessions of a dying person are transferred from the moment he says to give is if he's referring to a specific one, and that's why here we have to be referring to a specific one. And the Gemara notes that's not halacha ma'aseh. We don't paskin that way. Even if he just says give a money, that's enough. We'll give it. Now the Gemara wants to know, why doesn't Rav Papa like Rav Zvid's pshat? Why does Rav Zvid not like Rav Papa's pshat? So the Gemara says Rav Papa doesn't like Rav Zvid's pshat because Rav Zvid's pshat is based on the assumption that the rule of Ma'amad Shlashim, the rule of when you have three people, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and Shimon's holding the possession of Reuven, and he says transfer, so that Rav Zvid's answer is based on the assumption that that only works if Shimon is holding specific property for Reuven. he's guarding it for him. If it's loaned to Reuven, if it's loaned to Shimon, if Reuven lent money to Shimon, and now Shimon could spend it, so Rav Zvid's pshat is assuming that it wouldn't work in that scenario. And the logic there is that then Shimon's not holding it for Reuven anymore. Shimon's holding it for himself because he has a right to spend it. He has an obligation to pay back, but not the same money to Reuven. So therefore, Rav Zvid is assuming that it wouldn't work for, in that case where it's lent to Shimon, it wouldn't work for Reuven to say, I want you to give it to Levi, because he's not holding it on Reuven's behalf. All he is holding it. So therefore, that's the reason that the Gemara had said in the name of Rav that this case could only work if the money is piled in the corner. If it's piled in the corner, then he's guarding it for him. If it's not piled in the corner, that means that he lent it to him, and that's what it means to say. Now Rav Papa disagrees. Rav Papa holds even if it's just lent from Reuven to Shimon, Reuven could order Shimon, give it to Levi, and it's transferred to Levi, it's owed to Levi as soon as he says that. Now, the Gemara is going to analyze this more at length towards the end of the daf. For now, the Gemara goes on to why Rav Zvid did not want to say Rav Papa's pshat, and that's for the following reason. If you look carefully in the Mishnah, he says the Mishnah can't be talking about a dying individual. Why? Because the Mishnah said, where the guy said, give a get to my wife, or give a shtar shecher to the Eved, and he dies, you can't give it because he died. So the reason is because he died, clearly implying that in the same exact scenario where he was still alive, you could give it. Now, why? It was also very carefully that he said give. He didn't say write. The implication, therefore, is as follows. If the guy says, give a get to my wife, you will give it. If he says, write a get to my wife, you won't. Because you'll assume, when he just says, write a get for my wife, he did not say give. And he doesn't want you to give it. He doesn't want to divorce her. He just wants to tease her, or he wants to pain her by ordering a get written. He wants to scare her. And therefore, his intent is not to divorce her, so you can't divorce her. That's a clear implication of the Mishnah. However, that halacha is not true by a person who's dying. A dying person, we say, if he says right, he meant to give, because his intent is to divorce her to save her from falling to Yibum, or from being a divorcee, or from being a widow. So the reason he just said right and he didn't say give is because he's not in his fully aware state of mind because of the sickness that he has. And therefore, the fact that our Mishnah is specifically excluding that if you said it right, you wouldn't give it if he was still alive, means we're not talking about a dying person. We must be talking about a healthy person. Now, he proves this. Rav Zvid proves this. And he brings a Mishnah that says, in the beginning they used to say that somebody who's being let out in chains to receive the death penalty, and he says, write a get for my wife, you would write it and give it. And then they added on the same thing is true about somebody who's departing on a dangerous trip, and Shimon Shizuri answered even somebody who is ill and is close to death. So you see, Shimon Shizuri added that even a person who's dying from an illness, still it's enough if he just says right, you assume that he means to say actually right and give. So that's what Rav Zvid says. Now, Rav Ashi asks on this, he says, what makes you think that we are holding like Rav Shimon Shizuri? Now, maybe this mission is not holding like Rav Shimon Shizuri, and therefore it says that you have to say give, and it is talking about a shchach merat, it is talking about a dying man, and it just doesn't hold like Rav Shimon Shizuri, and it holds that if you would just say right, you wouldn't give it, not like what Rav Shimon Shizuri says. Okay, now the Gemara moves on. The Gemara has accepted the answers here. Now the Gemara moves on to analyze what we said before. So the Gemara says, we quoted before in the name of Rav. Somebody says, the halacha of Maimid Shlashton, where Reuven says to Shimon, you're holding something for me, give it to Levi. It's transferred right away as long as all three people are there. Says Rava, it's only if Shimon is holding the money for Reuven, he's guarding it. It's a pikadon, it's a deposit, not if it's a loan. So, says Rava, I would assume, logically, Rav's halacha should not be true if it's a loan. However, he uses an expression of a shvua, a vow. He says, halekim, by God. Rav said it even in a loan. And the Gemara also quotes Shmuel said the name of Levi. If somebody owes money, he has a loan, and he says give it to someone else, and all three people are there, it transfers possession right away. So you see here, therefore, that Rava and Rasvid held that it should not transfer if it was a loan. Rav, however, says that it transfers even if it's a loan, and Rav Papa seems to say that way as well. So the Gemara says, what's the reason? So Meimar says the reason that it transfers even if it's a loan, even though Shimon is not holding it on Reuven's behalf, it now belongs to Shimon. He just owes money, but he's not holding it for him. The reason that it transfers is because when Reuven gave the money to Shimon in the first place, it's as if he made a condition with him, and he said, you're going to pay it back to whoever I tell you to. And if I want you to pay it back to me, you'll pay it back to me, but if I want, I could transfer the debt to someone else and you'll pay it back to him. And since he agreed to that, the moment he says, I want you to pay it back to Levi, the debt is now owned by Levi, and he has to pay it back to Levi, because that was the original arrangement that he set up. So the Gemara says, okay, but Rav Ashi has a kasha on this. And what happened if Levi is a child? What happened if Levi wasn't born yet at the time that Reuven lent the money to Shimon? So would you say then that it doesn't work? Because with the time that Shimon accepted the money, he couldn't have agreed that if Reuven wants me to transfer the debt to Levi, I do that. Levi doesn't even exist at that time. So we're referring to that it retroactively became owed to Levi, but Levi wasn't born yet. Now, this is what's called a davar shalei bo la'ila. That's something which is not in the world yet. Can you make a transfer of title of something or to someone who doesn't exist in the world yet? Now, that's a machlekes of Meir and the Chacham elsewhere in Shas. The Gemara points out, even according to a Meir who says a person could transfer ownership of something which doesn't exist, that's only to a person who exists. You can't give something to a person who doesn't exist. That's for sure not chal. So the Gemara therefore wants to find a new explanation as to how it is possible that the ownership will transfer from Reuven to Levi when Shimon's holding the loan, and that the Gemara will come up with more additional discussion on the next daf.